Today is Monday, January 27th, 2025, and this is Spring Office Hours Season 4, Episode 3, Java Without Spring, Understanding the Spring Advantage. My name is Dan Vega, Spring Developer Advocate at Broadcom, joined by my good friend and colleague, DaShaun Carter. DaShaun, how's it going?
It is a wonderful day. It's a wonderful day. It's a little bit cold here, yeah, it's a good day. I'll be honest. When this topic came across the board, I was like, what even is that? I don't know. It's been so long that I don't even know. This is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We'll get into it, kind of why we decided to choose this topic for today. But first off, congratulations to you and your Kansas City Chiefs back in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
For a third time. What is it, like 5 times in the last 6 years or something? I don't know.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah, 3 trips in a row. And then we had one off. We lost to Tampa Bay, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't even in the Super Bowl. That was Super Bowl.
That was Super
We lost
Bowl,
Tampa Bay. Yeah, I mean, we're doing all right. We're doing all right.
Well, my girls are happy. I have a house full of girls, and all they care about is Taylor Swift will be at the Super Bowl.
Yeah, we are all happy for Taylor Swift. She has a house that she shares with Travis Kelce, not too far from here, and we shop at the same bike store. I'm not going to go any further. I'm just saying that we cross paths every once in a while.
All right. Well, Travis is a Clevelander, so I'm always cheering for him, which is kind of funny because Travis and Jason Kelce are both from Cleveland, and he's an Eagles guy. And then we got the Kansas City guy.
Yep.
So
Yep.
normally Jason's in the stadium with his Travis jersey. I wonder what's going to happen for the Super Bowl. I guess family probably trumps format.
I think so. I think it's one of those things where it's like, they'll be happy either way, right? He's just in a really good position. That his, the team that he sponsored, that he won a championship with, like that's his team. Like he'll be happy, but he won't be upset if his brother wins. Right?
Yeah, I like when the Super Bowl rolls around because it means we're getting closer to being out of this, what we know as winter and this cold time. And not that I'm counting down or anything, but 42 days until we spring the clocks forward. And I always look forward to that every year. So.
I'm putting a lot on the calendar. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be fully transparent. I'm having a hard time getting out the door. It is cold. I'm having a hard time getting in gear. And maybe it's just my age. Maybe I'm just getting old. But I would like to give it one more season. So in 2025, I've committed. I've signed up for a bunch of races, including one next Sunday.
Nice.
I've signed up. I'm going to give it a full, at least one more season.
Yeah.
Of racing and training and trying to get back into shape, kick some of this dust off, and some of the jiggly parts.
I like running and golfing, and these are 2 things you cannot do right now.
Yeah.
So looking forward to that. What have you been up to? We had no show last week. We had MLK Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday when we usually film, so we decided to take the day off. But we had a lot going on that last week. Jitter Ted's here,
and he's going for a run.
And
I'm going to tell him that you can actually, if you run with your phone, you can actually listen to this live. I know it works really, really well on Twitch. I haven't tried doing it live on any of the other channels, but you can listen to it live if you've got a phone and some earbuds.
I listen to YouTube live streams in the car while I'm driving, so I try not to stare at the phone, but it works.
Yeah, sometimes those conversations, when like music, I kind of get an idea of hey, here's how far I've gone, here's how I'm doing. You get kind of in a cadence. But when I'm listening to podcasts or other live streams, I'm just running naturally, and my cadence doesn't shift, and I can see that in my metrics that I'm running. So I like that.
Speaking of Jitter Ted, I heard you guys were on a live stream that went pretty well. What were you guys doing?
Yeah, he doesn't even know how well we were. He came in the middle. I was just like, hey, he joined in the chat. And I was like, come on, we were talking about his TDD game.
Oh, nice.
Yep. And he jumped in. And it was just, it was good times.
Cool. I got a new camera, so I'm excited about that. I don't know if anybody can tell the difference, but it might be a slight little difference and at least zoomed in a little. But I love messing with kind of setups, and I'm redoing the office and all the things. So I have fun kind of trying to dial that in. It's one of those things that is never perfect. You always just kind of play with. So
Daniel was paying attention to a couple of the streams. I did get the power fixed. I bought a new Anchor 200-watt power supply that's in the latest blog, and it does work. And what I'm realizing is if you start the power up, or I think this is what happens, if I start the power up without having the right power, then there's a file that gets created or some flag gets flipped that says, hey, it doesn't have the right power. But if you do the first boot with the proper power, then you don't have that until you flip the switch and you give it bad power.
Well, I did some videos last week too. So I had a weird December. We had Christmas, and then we took the kids to Disney World, and then we all got sick, and then I had a wedding, and then I had a conference to go to. So I feel like last week was like, all right, the new year has finally started for me. I'm like back. And I was like, I got to get caught up on, I have a huge backlog of like videos that I want to record. I recorded 7 videos last week, published 6, which is like, that is a record for me. That is not going to be duplicated. Please don't hold me to that. That was me kind of catching up. So I had some fun with that. And I was able to get 6 videos published last week on a wide variety of topics.
And they're probably longer than 1 minute long.
They are. They're all like 20 to 30 minutes each. So
yeah. See, I have been trying to do trying to get better, right? You set such a high bar. It's hard, but it's baby steps. You want to get better at anything, do more of it. And I've been creating some little videos and doing the editing. Trying to find my groove. But it takes me 2 hours to edit one video. That's only a minute.
Completely understandable. Like that is a process that you get better at. And one of the best tips I ever got was like every video, just try to get better at one thing. Like, hey, maybe the color on this is better. Maybe the audio is better. Maybe I added a graphic in this one or worked on a transition. Just one little thing every video. And if you keep doing that, like you said, putting in those reps, you'll get a little bit better. So
there we go.
I've been doing that too. I was looking at maybe hiring an editor, because that would be something that I can kind of take off my plate. But the YouTube channel doesn't make a ton of money. And so and believe me, editors completely worth every dollar you can pay them. I just don't have the money to pay them right now. And like, cause usually they charge by the minute and my tutorials are longer. I'm not creating 6-minute videos for YouTube. These are 30 minutes. And so we're talking about $500, $600, $700 for a video. And I'm like, I don't make that in a month off of YouTube. So, so I've been doing the same, trying to get better at editing and streamline that process.
I'm trying to convince my kids that this is a fun thing to do. So all my kids now have Apple Silicon. They all have access to a machine. Let's see if we can get some help.
Get them editing as like their, and then, hey, I'll give you some more allowance. This could be a little job for you.
I'll pay them proper. Get that LLC going, and let's work together. Let's partner. Yeah.
All right. So I think before we get into today's episode, I just want to remind everyone, this is the Spring Office Hours live stream. We do it usually every Monday, 1 to 2 Eastern. If you are not here live, you can go ahead and catch the replay on the Spring Developer YouTube channel. If you are here live, DaShaun, what is your job to do? What do you need
your
to be
job
doing
when you come to my house for dinner? If you leave hungry, that's your fault. When you're here, you've got questions. We don't want you to be stuck. So when you're here and you have questions, ask in the live stream. We have a great community. There's always going to be someone here to help you. Yeah, don't leave hungry.
Right. And then if you want to, and you're on the run like Jitter Ted is today, or you're in the car, we go ahead and take this live stream. We turn it into a podcast. Usually you can find it the next morning. So I publish these at night. They'll go up on Tuesday morning. You can go ahead and get us wherever you get your
It's
podcast.
hard to keep up with all the things that are happening in the ecosystem. And if we can do just a tiny bit to help, if you could spend 1 hour a week with us just to help, keep what's going on, get a sense, get a temperature, a lay of the land, just 1 hour a week with us, and sometimes maybe a couple minutes more, a couple minutes less, hang out with us for a little bit, because we want to help you keep up with what's happening in the Java ecosystem.
It is our full-time job to do this, and we can't keep up. So we spend all week trying to stay up to date with things that are going on and then inform you about it. So it's a lot of fun though. I love what we do. And this has been a lot of fun. So season 4, that's pretty cool. We're into episode 3. Today is Java without Spring, understanding the Spring advantage. And the idea behind this, DaShaun, was I was putting together some videos. I realized that I want to put out some more just generic Java videos, not just to do with Spring, but Java, right? And I started thinking about some of the things I take for granted when kicking up a new Spring application. So somebody had asked me, like, okay, what is that logger that you just put in your application? Like, how do I do that in a Java application? It's like, oh, yeah, that's something you have to do. So when you create a new Java application, you got to like go get the dependency. So in this case, we're using logback. You got to create a configuration file. Where do you want to like send these logs to? What if I wanted to change the logging level? How do I do that? There's a programmatic way to do it. There's a way to do it in configuration. There's a lot that goes into just something as simple as logging in your Java application, right? Not that it's hard, but it's just if you don't know, if it's not something you do every day, I wanted to kind of create some more videos around that. And so what I wanted to do today is just go through some things that we kind of take for granted and maybe talk about them, just so the next time you're in a Spring application, maybe you can kind of recognize that.
It's always good to level set.
As a learning experience, okay, I use logging in my Spring applications all the time. How do we do that in Java? Let me do that from the ground up, so I get a better kind of understanding and just appreciation.
Yeah, don't do it every day though. Don't like. We're just gonna review all the reasons why you don't want to do things the hard way.
Right.
And
again,
yeah,
not that they're completely hard to do in a Java application. It just takes time to do all of these things.
And here's the other thing that I can say from the position that I'm in when we deal with customers. There's a lot of customers that have projects. They build their own frameworks. They build their own things. And those things, whether you're using Spring or not, the things that you'll build that you'll see in an enterprise around logging, for example, what you'll see is that, what you'll see is that those frameworks for here's how we do logging at large company, those libraries, those tools, they end up looking a whole lot like Spring. And you know why? Because we get that. It's an open source project. So we learn from the community. We see what companies and customers and communities doing, and then we do the same thing. This looks like a good way of doing things. Let's abstract that so that you can move forward easier.
Yeah, and one of the things that we see a lot is, so just to stay on the topic of kind of logging, if somebody like abstracts their own logging framework out, one of the problems with that is there's like one or two developers who did that, right? What happens when they go away and that thing's no longer kept up to date? Or you want to upgrade the next version of Spring Framework or Spring Boot or Java. And those third-party dependencies that you kind of created are now tied to that. Like it gets harder and harder to upgrade. So like, let's stick with what's kind of baked into Spring, right?
Yes, that's real. And the maintainability. Oh, I could talk about that for days.
Yeah. Okay, I want to start with kind of project setup and build tools. So one of the, I don't know about you, but one of the things that kind of drew me to Spring in the first place was the Spring Initializr. Like, hey, I go to this website, I use it inside of a IDE, and I just kind of get to click around and say, this is the type of application that I'm building. And it looks at all of those and creates this project for you that you can download and you are ready to go. And that for me is like kind of everybody's intro to Spring, but probably one of the most important things, right?
I'll be honest. My intro to Spring wasn't through the initializer. I remember walking down the hall. My reason for Spring was Spring. But Spring Boot, my refound love for Spring via Spring Boot came through the actuator. I was running things in production. I wanted metrics. I wanted real-time insights into what my apps were doing, health. And yeah, that's what pulled me back in. And I was using it for months before somebody pointed me to a Josh Long video that said, oh yeah, start at spring.io. Months. I was using it and I had no idea that the initializer existed. And yeah, now I'm hooked.
Yeah. And let me kind of re-clarify that. That's what got me interested in Spring Boot. Because I did Spring development where we had all these XML files. And like we would take a successful project that we had and copy it over and then strip a bunch of stuff out and then start a new one. And that's never fun. And those things all had like specific dependencies, which were never fun. So yeah, this kind of made it so much easier to just, all right, I want to start a new app. Here's the type of app I'm going to build. I don't need to copy an existing one. I'm off and running. And now I can kind of focus in on my business logic.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a comment here. Classic Spring with XML configuration files, which, funny enough, is a video I did last week. I did last week on XML configuration because someone had asked, is it okay to mix annotation-based configuration and XML configuration? I said, absolutely, because you might be in a scenario where you're working on an existing project that already has XML configuration in place. I don't think it's worth the overhead to go through and rewrite all of that if it's already working. If you're starting a new feature and you can use annotation-based configuration, great. But no need to like rewrite everything because you're not really getting anything out of that, right? And so I showed a demo of like how to use XML configuration and annotations in the same application. So
this whole like, should I rewrite it because there's a new way, because there's a new thing? This is a conversation I'll never get tired of having.
Yeah.
And we are doing a lot to try to help people migrate, move on to the latest versions. And when there's XML configuration, I don't have to go and change it to annotation based. I can still be on the latest and greatest Spring Boot, and still be using the same XML.
Yep.
And for all of the other
works
tools
the same
that are, doing the property replacement in the XMLs before they get like that can all still work. Don't bite off what you don't need to. Don't gold plate just to gold plate. If it's still maintainable, especially if you can have it automated migrations and remediations, like that's super powerful.
Yep.
So yeah, you don't have to upgrade, just upgrade.
So another thing, I go ahead and create a new project from the Spring Initializr, and I choose Maven or Gradle, whatever you want. So I choose Maven, I download this project, and I get Maven. I get this build file that's kind of configured already for me in Spring, but I also get a Maven wrapper. Have you ever like created a Java project and created your own Maven wrapper? Like there's a little bit involved to do that.
MBD wrapper : wrapper.
Yep. All right.
That's my command. Then it drops it in and then you're good.
But if you've never done that, you don't know how to do that, right?
Right.
And what does the Maven wrapper kind of give us out of the box?
Yeah, I get a versioned Maven so that when you and I are working on the same project, we're using the same Maven. And it might not seem that big of a deal when we're going between like 3.9.1 to 3.9.5 or 3.9.9. Like that doesn't seem like, but when we decide to take the new 4.0 release and we're using some of those new 4.0 early access, you can download it now, early access features, then it makes a difference, right? Then we're not wondering like, hey, how come it doesn't work on my machine and it works on yours? Having that git clone run, git clone test, git clone do all the things lifestyle, that's really valuable.
All right, so we've created a project. We have our build tool and some type of wrapper. Another thing the Spring Initializr does for us is manage those palms and all the dependency versions. And this doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is, especially in like large organizations, right?
Yep. Like, and still, right there, when we say just Java, can we go without Maven? Like that there are teams that are doing that. There are teams, there are organizations that are still doing Make. There are organizations that are still using Ant. And there's other build tools. Like there are things that are happening that, we take a lot of things for granted. And for me, it's, Maven, Simon's here, SDK man, the Maven wrapper. I want these things in place so that I can be consistent, especially for a distributed team. I can be consistent and I can do all these things on my laptop. But so there, if we strip it down to just be, plain Java, there's a lot of things that go into that.
Yeah, and then we get a whole bunch of like configuration files too, like maybe a git ignore file that's pre-compiled with like a whole bunch of things that we should be ignoring. Because if you don't do that, I can imagine a Java project where I push all the target files to the Git repo, and we don't want to do that, right?
We do not want to do that, and you don't want to see my .ide folder either. We don't want to pass our passwords. If we got local properties, we don't want to pass those things. We don't want to overwrite those things. There's a lot here. That we take a lot for granted.
And then we get a project structure too. We get this nice project structure where we can like kind of define where some of our
The consistent project structure. Right? Like, there's so many things here. These conventions that we've learned over the years.
Yes.
And so even if you're not using Spring Boot, you want to have those things.
Right. Right. And so all this is, we just created a project. We haven't done anything yet. We haven't actually dipped into kind of the functionality that we get out of the box, but depending on what type of application you kind of chose from the Spring Initializr, you get a whole lot of infrastructure without having to like do all of that. And I remember the days of like, okay, this is the type app we're going to build. We're going to spend a couple weeks kind of setting up boilerplate infrastructure stuff before we can get into like the actual business logic of the application. And so this just makes it so much easier to like get up and running quickly.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of SDK Man. Yeah, the SDK Man RC. So that when I go into a folder, something that Simon's worked on, I check it out. I've got the Maven wrapper. I've got the SDK Man. I do SDK env install. I'm on the same build. Say if he's using the early access of Java 24, I can be too. And I don't have to worry about the setup configuration. I can have that consistent on my laptop, whether it's Mac or Linux or in my CI. I can do the exact same things.
You combine that with like Docker Compose, and man, you've saved so much time of downloading a repo and having to like do all of this configuration. And
kids these days don't know how good that they've got it, Dan. And I hate to sound like an old man yelling at clouds, but like
you are.
These kids,
but it's okay.
They don't know how good that they've got it.
Yeah, and by kids, you could be 40 or 50 jumping into a project for the first time. So
yeah.
But yeah, I see another comment here. Where is it? There it is. Hi guys, can you explain the use of plugins section in your pom.xml? So yeah, so this is a way to kind of bring in Maven plugins to your build system. So one of the ones that we use a lot, and I know you've been using it on your other podcast, where you've been building out kind of full stack applications, is there's like a Maven resources plugin or a front end plugin, right? Where you want to say like, hey, when I do something, I want to build this and I want you to take everything and put it into like the static folder or something. So this is just a way to add functionality to your build process. There are a number of like really great plugins out there. And then Spring comes with, some plugins available as well. So there's a Spring Boot Maven plugin, which adds a lot of functionality to it. If you're building like GraalVM native images, there's a GraalVM plugin for Maven or Gradle. And then again, just adding extra functionality to your build process. So anything you want to add to
that? Not really. Like that's it. Right? Here's kind of like, I'm not saying don't go and learn it. Like education is power, knowledge is power. Yeah. Like go learn those things, but just don't do it. That's all I'm saying. It's like, don't waste your time. Once you understand what's happening, whether it's plugins or, injection, whatever it is, once you've learned it, don't do it the hard way. Like, we all have to go.
Like I said, go watch a video I did last week. If you just want to, like, if you've never done it, if you've never like configured a bean via XML, just do it once so you can see how it's done. Maybe one day you're thrown into a legacy project that has all XML configuration.
Has a web.xml.
Yeah.
Right? It has a web.xml and a webin folder. Like, I forgot all. I used for years. Yeah. A decade plus. Right. But I don't need to. I can go faster. And yeah. There's a comment on one of the socials earlier. He's like, these people, some developers, they know how to get up and running and get to production in a couple of hours. It was Sultan Burnham. I can't remember his real name. And I was like, it's not magic. It's Spring Boot. Like,
Chris DeMars.
Yes, Chris. There's value in getting up and going and getting out the door fast.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there is. But there's also, like I said, I think understanding some of this, like what's happening behind the scenes, just I think makes you appreciate it better, but also gives you a deeper understanding of how things work. So, all right. So that is kind of my like getting up and started, your project setup and your build tools. Another big one is dependency management with Spring Boot starters. Never mind. Comment here. Never mind Docker Compose files. Jump straight to the test containers test main support.
I'm a big fan of the the test containers, test main support, and Spring Boot test run. What is the command? It's Spring Boot test run, right?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Sometimes I just use the IDE and click buttons. So
yeah, but yeah, fun stuff. It's also good to see here, Tim.
So dependency management with Spring Boot starters. This is something we don't really appreciate. And so a Spring Boot starter is really just a collection of dependencies. So when you pick, say, a Spring Web project, it includes a Spring Boot starter web. That Spring Boot starter is made up of many dependencies that all kind of work well together. And there's a Spring Boot starter core that includes things like logging and configuration and things that you need to kind of get up and running. So I've done a couple videos on the channel where I've went and created a Spring project without Spring Boot. Like, let's just create a Java project and talk about the dependencies that you need to create something. And until you create a Spring project that is like a Spring Web MVC project without Spring Boot, I don't think you can really appreciate what's being done for you under the hood. There's a lot that goes into this. So the next time you're in a Spring project and you include some type of starter, maybe it's a Spring Web or a Spring GraphQL or Spring AI, if you're in an IDE, you can kind of command click on that to jump into that starter and just look at all the dependencies that are included there and see what's there and see what's being done for you. You also get version management and compatibility instead of having to like manually configure all these dependencies, which I remember back in the day, it was like, well, which one works with this? Which one can I use? Can I use the latest? Yeah.
Like, how do we building those
dependency
graph? Like, can I use this one? You change one version and now everything else
does it
breaks.
Compile?
Again, they don't know how good they've got it. But there's more to the starters, right? There's also the defaults, right? When I add a starter, I also get same defaults and properties and auto-configured defaults. So that when I add Redis, Spring Data Redis starter, it's going to look for a Redis on 0000, port 6379, I think. And it's going to look for those default things, same defaults for what you might have running locally. That's another piece. And all of that can be configured by properties to override.
Auto configuration is huge. It is really a lot of what makes Spring and helps you get up and running quickly. And like you said, if I include some type of data source, right, like some type of driver for PostgreSQL, like, oh, you probably need a data source bean. Let me configure one for you and let me provide some same defaults that you can override later if you want. But this gets you up and running without having to, you would have to go in and create a data source class that connects to a database, sets some of these properties. Like, that's a lot of infrastructure that I don't want to do. Like, I don't want to focus on that. I want to build my application, not configure infrastructure, right?
This is a good comment. It says, I learned a lot about Spring internals with the original Spring Native plugin.
Yeah.
Like all of the things that happened with Spring Framework 6, Spring Boot 3 and above, so that we could have this native compilation. And I also learned a ton. Remember, Spring Boot 3.0 first came out, we were trying to pull in all these other projects and we were realizing, oh, wait, those hints, that metadata that's needed to provide to Graal VM, that doesn't exist. And we were learning about, oh yeah, here's why. This bean gets loaded this way. I also learned a lot, and I'm glad now that I don't have to deal with that. I'm glad I can forget a lot of those things that I learned, for that year and a half, 2 years, where I was deep in the internals.
There's a lot of really good presentations out there. I think a couple that are really sticking to mind, if you go out on YouTube, Madura, who is on the Spring team, has a couple of behind the Spring magic. And I know I'm pretty sure Sebastian and Brian Gazelle have done similar talks. If you can go find some of those are really good presentations to kind of dive into and okay, what happens with auto configuration? That's a cool word, but how does it work behind the scenes? And if you can find a couple of those presentations on YouTube, I think those are really good ones to kind of dive in and learn a little bit more about Spring.
I think this is Martin. It says, hi guys, I'm launching a project using Spring Webflux and Kotlin. How could I jumpstart developing the basic CRUD operations besides the more complex logic? Do you recommend Spring Data REST, for example? Yes, yes, the answer is yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. That's the way to jumpstart your CRUD operations. Start with Spring Data REST. Or
Spring Data in
Spring
general.
Data in general.
Yeah, Spring Data in general. There are a bunch of different types of projects you can use. So with Spring Data, maybe you're using something like Hibernate, you can use Spring Data JPA. Maybe you want to use a more domain-driven design approach and you're not using Hibernate. You can use something like Spring Data. Why am I just Spring Data JDBC? Sorry. Lost my train of thought for a second. There are Spring Data projects for the different stores out there, but what Spring Data does in a lot of these projects is give you the idea of a repository. So I can extend a repository like the JPA repository or the list CRUD repository, and I get all of that CRUD functionality out of the box. Again, if I'm talking to a database, I probably want CRUD functionality. You handle that, Spring. Let me focus on like the more complex scenarios so I don't have to write all that CRUD stuff out.
Simon being Simon does a good job of like the details are in the words that you use. You said a reactive Webflux, but then you said REST. And those two kind of look a little different at times. Like, are you sure you need this reactive stack in Webflux? Because when you're combining it with blocking REST type APIs, yeah, then you're going to have some other things to consider. But yeah. Point.
Yeah, and now now in today's world, we have if you're on Spring Boot 3.2 and JDK 21, you have virtual threads. That could be an alternative because again, with something like Webflux, there are some advantages to it, but it's an all or nothing thing. Like you can't mix and match. Like you are bought into the reactive stack. It's a different way of thinking. It's a different paradigm for programming. So there's overhead in learning some things. Again, there's some pros to it, depending on what you're doing. But if you're just looking at kind of an alternative to scaling your applications, you could probably use something like Spring Web with virtual threads. So,
just to continue down that path, I'll be honest. I still want to get better at my reactive programming. I want to understand that stack better and have a little bit more reps. But I don't feel the need to reach for that lately. I feel a lot more comfortable now that we have virtual threads being on the stack that I'm comfortable with, knowing that I'm not going to run into as many problems in the future.
Yeah, and so sticking on this topic, like virtual threads, right? If you go into a Spring application today and you're using Spring Web and you're using you're connecting to a data store, there is a single property in a Spring application that you need to configure. Virtual threads.enabled equals true. And what that does for you is anywhere that we are kind of in a scenario where we may take a request, like in a controller, right? We are automatically configuring virtual threads in there. So when you make a call to another service or you talk to a database, we're using virtual threads. They're no longer blocking. Take yourself out of a Spring application. You can still use virtual threads on the JDK in a Java application, but now you need to like manually configure the virtual threads executor everywhere that you're going to use it. And it's not overly complex, but it's just something else that you need to think of, right? So I think that's what I'm trying to drive home today. Is just the next time you use a feature, think about it. Like, how does it work underneath the hood?
I'm going to take another tangent on virtual threads. I work with a lot of customers, and sometimes we run into problems. Hey, we're running into performance-related things, and a lot of times, like, hey, like, oh, it's a network. Like, we see these issues. I've got a lot of wins. Just speaking again from just my perspective, working with customers, I have a lot of wins by saying, hey, let's get to Java 21. Let's get to Spring Boot 3.4 or whatever it is. Let's get to a place where we can do virtual threads. Let's get there, and then let's turn on virtual threads. And I've had a lot of success. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to solve all your problems, but you do have to be on a modern framework. You do have to be on, Java 21. You do have to be on these later versions. You have to have support for that in order to turn that on. But it doesn't fix everything. What I will say as a cautionary tale, don't enable virtual threads and just assume that everything is going to work the same or better. You have to validate those things. So that's the other side of the cautionary tale is don't go to all your projects and turn on virtual threads. And then when something goes wrong, say like, what happened? Because there are a lot of things that can happen when you do, increase the throughput for application A. All of those other applications that are downstream or upstream from that application, they're going to be affected. So virtual threads is great, but tread lightly, carefully.
All right. Another topic I wanted to talk about was dependency injection, something we kind of take for granted. This idea that, in a small job application may not make a big difference, but if we start creating larger applications and we have this class that is dependent on two things, and those classes are depending on other things, right? Instead of everywhere that we need a class, we create a new instance of it. We basically are using inversion of control in Spring, and we are saying, I don't want to manage instances of classes anymore. I want to put that on the framework, create me an instance of this class, and then wherever that is needed, I want you to go ahead and kind of wire that in for me. And I don't know if you've ever done this without Spring. I mean, I have back in the day. I think Juice. Yeah, Juice was something we used. But Juice is great, by the way.
But Jakarta EE now has it.
Jakarta EE has it. But again, those are, if you have to do this from the ground up, it's another infrastructure problem that you're building instead of kind of tackling the task at hand.
This idea, this inversion of control, I remember when it came along, I remember being like, oh, that makes a whole lot of sense. That when my code goes from my laptop to dev, it gets a different set of properties. That sounds great. In that time, we were doing the Orion server or Tomcat server. Hey, here's the properties for this environment. It was in some shared folder that everybody was pulling in. And that made sense. From test, then it goes to prod, and prod had different properties, and I couldn't see them. They were on the class path. I just got to assume they were on the class path somewhere, and somebody was making things work. But that artifact didn't have to change as it went through the different environments. And that was a huge value add. And now, for today's show, we're talking Java without Spring. Now, we've learned that is a good pattern. That's a good pattern, and now it's available in that Java EE stack as well.
You just brought up some scar tissue. I'm just thinking of tomcat.xml files that were kind of all over the place. And, I got to copy that and run that on my local machine. A lot of fun. Speaking of configuration, something else I want to do a video on that I just kind of ran across last week. I was converting a Spring project into a Java project just to kind of show some of this stuff off. And one of the things is like, okay, what if I want configuration in my project? I want to read an application.properties. I want to read an application.yaml. How do I do that? There are different projects in the Java world to read properties, to read YAML, and then kind of set that into your running application, right? And then I was like, okay, well, there's a Snake YAML project out there. I went through and I was able to like set up a YAML file, read it into my Java project, and use those values in my application. But then like, okay, what if I want to use an environment variable instead of a hard-coded string in that YAML file? That's a whole nother problem you got to tackle, right? Now you have to have some code in there that looks at it and looks for like a pattern and goes, okay, instead of like trying to read that value, now I'm going to read that from the system environment, like a system.get environment, whatever that variable is. So like, again, just a little thing, but something that if you got to build from the ground up, not a lot of fun.
That order of operations, the order of like what has the priority.
Yeah.
And you have that in other frameworks too.
Yeah.
But to have to go and figure that out for yourself, once you do that for your team, your org, your enterprise, once you do that, that starts to look a lot like Spring.
What else? So we talked about kind of logging and auto configuration, web application development. Spring MVC again. Go choose just go to Spring Initializr, choose Spring Web, and then look at the Spring Boot Starter, all the stuff that's included in the Spring Boot Starter web. We also bring in like some Jakarta stuff for handling different things from the Jakarta, like that we use that in a Java project. So then you need like a Tomcat. I remember not having embedded Tomcat at one point. Remember having to like configure an actual Tomcat server. That wasn't a lot of fun.
Oh, so man, this comes full circle to what we were talking about before. I remember being able to run Spring Boot, just that idea. I could switch from web service A or to service B, and I wasn't like copying things into a Tomcat. What was the folder? Where did you put your war files in Tomcat? Like it was in WebInf.
Well, there was like a web apps folder.
The web apps folder, right? You had your war file, and then it would automatically explode. And there's a trade-off here, right? And Tomcat, I could run multiple war files. I could drop those into that web apps folder and have everything into one JVM. I could do that. And that's a great approach. Spring Modulith. This idea where, hey, there was benefits, and we've had people here even on the show talk about the value of being able to do that in a single JVM. If I've got 20 apps, 20 modules, 20 war, web projects, contexts, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I got 20 of them. I can run them in the same JVM, but then you've got other problems.
The problem with that, though, that we always ran into is one of those application takes on a huge amount of requests and crashes. Guess what happens to all the 19 other projects?
Yes.
Those crash as well. So
we don't prevent that by doing Spring Modulith.
No.
But what we do prevent with Spring Modulith is the way that we're connecting those applications. Because when I had a bunch of applications in that web apps, they were calling REST or gRPC. They were communicating. We have simplified that by making it message driven, by having it all in the same, not just JVM, but the same application context. That communication also becomes better. So you just Spring Modulith has been on my mind for many, many reasons. But where do I start? I should start with the Spring Modulith because of this. And sorry, I know we're not supposed to be talking about Spring. We're supposed to be talking about Java. But this whole approach, this is awesome. And we're doing things. I'm still trying to figure out hey, could I do some of these other side projects that I have? Like I went out and I made a Vaadin app. And I'm thinking on Friday afternoon or Saturday afternoon, I just went out and hey, it's there, pycarifi.cc if you want to go check it out. I just made this little thing. It took me seconds to do, and then a couple more seconds because I did a CF push and it's running.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that. I'm not in the position in a lot of places I'll be considered a Java expert. But I couldn't do it without Spring. I couldn't get to production in the minutes that it takes me to get to production if I was not using Spring. I would be able to figure it out, but man, I don't want to go down that path.
Yeah, I got a comment here from B West. Says, lately I've been playing with the idea of building a random personal dev blog using Next.js and Java and Spring on the back end. And I know you have been building some full stack applications on your other podcast, and that's really cool to see kind of those two technologies mixed together. Another question, why Spring Boot chooses Java as a programming language? So if you kind of go back to the origins of Spring and why Spring was kind of created, starting with Rod Johnson, it came from the complexities that some of the complexities that we're kind of rekindling here today, DaShaun, of building J2EE applications, building these enterprise-grade applications in Java. And so Spring came along to try to solve a lot of those complexities. So that's really where it started. Now it's more of a JVM. So you can choose Java, you can choose Kotlin, you can choose something like Groovy, but it is run on the JVM. So
there's a lot of good questions here, and I'm just gonna say, Greg, so good to see you, man. Welcome. And yeah.
Except for your other comment, Greg, I'm not going to give. You said Vaadin's overrated, which we're going to.
Oh my goodness! Oh, but he laughed. He laughed. Hey, I put it out. He laughed. Vaadin is great. Get it up. Get it out the door. And I saw. I think he's one of the co-creators of Vaadin. He put out a comment that the Vaadin plugins get updated once a week, and then I think the other one was that there's a new Vaadin plugin that gets added. I think it was like 2,000 a year or something like that. Like that community around the plugins and around how easy it is to go. The Vaadin ecosystem of plugins for the UI reminds me a bunch of the Spring ecosystem and the Spring Boot projects that you have for the backend. They are very similar in my head, and it is really easy to get out the door.
Yeah, which kind of brings me to this comment that we got. Spring should have a component-based library like JSF has Prime Faces. Check out Vaadin. They have a component-based library of everything that you need to kind of build a UI. They got an answer for it. So I don't know if you've had a chance to check that out yet.
I don't know when the last time you did JSPs was, but when I hear like Prime Faces, like I know that there's still a massive community around Java Server Faces and Prime Faces. I still see it in production in the wild. But what I do know is that it's hard to get upgraded. A lot of times, what I see is those projects that are using Java Server Faces, Prime Faces, or other, they're stuck. A lot of times Java 8, sometimes Java 11, but they're stuck and they're having a hard time getting to where they need to be for regulatory or compliance reasons. They're supposed to be on a patch supported version and they're having a hard time getting there. Just sharing like this. Do you remember, I think it was last year. It might've been actually, it was in 23 when Josh was on stage with Dr. Sire and he took a Spring application and he walked it from Spring and the XML driven,
Yes.
and then he did an upgrade, and then and then here comes Spring Boot and the annotation driven, and then he went from Spring Boot and we went through the initializer and all the steps, and he brought it all the way up to whatever we were at 3.2. Do you remember that?
I do.
Just that idea, like that is still amazing to me. That if you chose Spring 1.x and you chose to run it in production like a lot of companies did, you have a path to get it up to Spring Framework 6.2, Spring Security 6.4, Spring Boot 3.4.2. You have a path to get there.
Yep.
And it's not as hard as you think it is because of the consistency, because of the backwards compatibility that we've done. You're going to have a little hiccup going from Java 8 to Java 17 rebasing, but we've helped you out with that.
Yep. I love this comment here from Smith. My first task with Spring Boot was converting an ER project to Spring Boot modules and ant scripts to Maven configurations. Yeah. So, again, you probably gained a lot of experience there and understood, just what you're getting out of a Spring Boot project. So that's pretty cool to see.
Oh, like that. I've got survivor bias. Going through those exercises I learned a lot and I never want to go back. Never again. A lot of great questions.
Yeah. So many.
I'm going to go back up here, top, like this one.
Yep.
Hi guys. I would like to get your opinion on application integration testing. Like how efficient is it when running Spring apps using Spring Boot plugin with test containers and WireMock for external dependencies? Like, have you looked at the alternatives? So I'm going to just take this one. The value that I have when I can go and clone your repository. Again, we talked about git clone run. I can go and clone your repository. You've got test containers configured for all of those external dependencies. If I can do a Maven test or Maven verify, and I can go and run all my tests and I can make sure that everything's working, that's massively powerful. If you've got anybody else working on this project, the onboard ability of them being able to go get clone and then do Maven package, Maven verify, whatever it is, go and validate it works. You don't have to tell them how to configure it, especially you have a Maven wrapper in there, you got a SDK NRC in there. They can go. There's massive value. And then you said this one word about how efficient is it? Where's the trade-off, right? Do you want to have Tomcat, Redis, Oracle? Do you want to have all those things running on your laptop for all your projects at all the time? Or when you're in project A, do you want to have it stand up, run all your tests, and then shut down? Do you want to have this ability? We talked about the test main. You can have it running locally. You can stand up all of those services that you need to run locally and run it. You can run that test configuration locally. There's a massive value there.
I'm just thinking like over the 24, 25 years I've been doing this, that testing pyramid. So you think about the pyramid where like the unit tests are on the bottom and the bulk of our tests were unit tests. The middle was kind of integration tests. The top was kind of functional testing. That testing pyramid for me has changed over the 25 years. The reason why the bulk of everything was a unit test was because we couldn't configure. We had shared database server. We had shared Redis servers. We weren't running these things on our local machines, right? And so as things like test containers and Docker have become a lot easier to use and a lot more efficient, we've been able to kind of change that testing pyramid. Yes, I still write unit tests because there are certain situations where I want to test this independently of anything else. But I'm writing many more integration tests today because of tools like test containers that make it so much easier to write those integration tests.
And I want fast feedback. I don't, a lot of us are distributed, and even if you're not, the idea of a shared database, that gives me the heebie-jeebies.
That's why we wrote unit tests, because I didn't want to click run and like wait 10 minutes for all of these integration tests to run.
Yep, with test containers, I can run it locally, and I can do these things locally, and it's my feedback loop, my ability to get my work done, and I'm being selfish. My ability to get my work done is so much better now that I don't have to worry about things. And even like the first team that I had to build, we didn't have all these technologies. And the laptop, if Dan came to work on my team, the laptop, we had to install the Rational Rose suite, the Netscape application server, the Oracle database. We had to install $20,000 worth of software just so that he could start working on the code.
Not to mention those setup documents like, oh, you're onboarding? We'll see you in 2 weeks, sir.
Yep. Next season.
That was never fun.
Yeah, there's another one here. And this is Smith. Smith, thanks for the good questions and comments. The problem with native images. There's no problem with native images. The build server memory. I've been speaking for weeks now about the ability to build native images for anywhere, for any platform, from any platform. With Spring Boot 3.4, I can build AMD images. I can build ARM64 images from my laptop, from anywhere. I can build those for you. And the memory issue, the opposite side of that, you want to worry about a build server and the memory issue of building a bunch of images. Those tiny little native images, now they go out to all of your developers. The benefit of having those native images is a multiplier, faster startup time. I can have my Kubernetes cluster of these images scale to 0 and start up in microseconds, right? Dozens of milliseconds. I can have these things start up. The trade-off of the extra 2 minutes, the little spike in memory usage to generate these native images, that trade-off, that happens once. And the startup time and how often those are getting used, the bigger the team, the more results you get, the better payoff you get. So don't throw away native images. Build native images with your pipelines, whether you use them or not. Your developers will help you. They will love you for it. And your cloud bill will love you for it.
Here's another good question with something I wanted to talk about. Your view on the impact of AI on development. Sometimes I get demotivated while learning, thinking about the impact of AI on software development and software development engineering jobs. So first off, to bring it back to kind of our topic today, what if you wanted to build a generative AI application in Java? Sure, you can go out to OpenAI, get an API key, figure out how to configure that to talk to their REST client, and you can get a response. But now there are a bunch of other things you're going to have to do when you start building out real world applications, right? Like, hey, I need to take that response and kind of turn that into an object in my system. So for that, you would want to bring in something like Jackson and figure out how to deserialize that into an object. You have to do that by hand. Instead, other things like, hey, I want to build RAG pipelines in my application. I want to talk to different models. I want to talk to different data stores. I want to use different PG vector stores. I want to use AI. I want to build AI agents. I want to build voice applications, right? There are all these things that go into kind of building these enterprise-grade applications. So bring in something like Spring AI that gives you all the tools to do that. I'm sure you could have done that in Java. You'd have to build a lot of things on top of that original REST call to make those happen. So again, Spring kind of making hard things easy, allowing us to focus on some of the the more business type of our application. So for that, your view on of AI on development, and we've said this many times, and I'm going to keep saying this, is that I am way more excited than I am fearful of AI kind of disrupting our industry. I've always been someone who is always able to adapt, and so I see AI as just another tool. A tool that is helping me be more productive, and yes, it is very prevalent today. So you need to learn how to build in generative AI into your applications using something like Spring AI. I would say, don't be fearful of it. Be excited about it. Be excited that you can learn something way more quickly now. Like if I wanted to build an iOS application, I don't have much experience building iOS applications, but I guarantee you I could publish something in an iOS app store this week if I wanted to. And that's exciting to me.
And the hardest part isn't the code. The hardest part of publishing in the App Store is configuring the App Store, getting the ID for your app. And that's the hardest part. Building the code, not hard. Getting through the different marketplaces, that's the hard part.
I'm excited. Just always be willing to adapt to your surroundings. If you're somebody who's sitting here going, AI, I don't care about any of this. AI is not for me. And I'm just going to keep building applications the way I build applications. And this AI thing is going to go away. All right. You're the person I worry about because you're not adapting to, I'm not saying that like you're going to sit down and AI is writing your entire applications, but look at it as a tool in your tool belt and try to take advantage of it.
Simon says a comment, to be fair, more firms should also leverage dev containers. And I do see dev containers popping up and having that ability to configure an environment.
Yep.
And I'm a little torn. I'm not fully convinced, and maybe it's because of all the process and practice that I have with giving that git clone run life. Maybe that's why I don't lean into the dev container so much. But I've done some recent talks using dev containers because it's nice. It's a nice way to hand off and easy on board for a lot of other things as well.
Okay. One other thing I just wanted to mention. We've gone through almost everything I had in my list that I want to talk about. We mentioned it earlier today too, was kind of database integration. I did a presentation at a conference where I said, okay, let's talk to a database in Java without Spring, right? There are a lot of things that you got to think about. Like it's not just a connection to a database. Like we have to think about connection pooling if more than one person is going to use this, right? Like how do you configure connection pooling in your application? How do you configure the different environments? Like I have a dev, a test, a production. We just talked about test containers. Like what do I use when I'm running tests? And then some of the things that we went through today, like yes, there's the JDBC API in the JDK. Sure, that's been around forever. And if you've ever tried to use that, just plain writing Java to write SQL, talk to a database, it's not the most intuitive thing, right? And that's where Spring kind of came in and gave us the JDBC template, the JDBC client, and ultimately Spring Data to kind of give us all of that CRUD functionality out of the box and get us up and running. So again, if you want to do just kind of a quick test on your side, just to see how things work, create a Java app that talks to a database and incorporate a lot of these features into that application, just to kind of appreciate what you get out of the box of Spring.
Yeah, it always comes back to me for like, there's two kind of buckets, the academic bucket, and I'm trying to get to production and make some money or save some money, save some time. And when you move from academic over to production, what are the things that you need, that you require to have around your app to feel confident so you can go to sleep at night when you're in production? What are those things? Logging, metrics, observability.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't even touch on that today.
Resilience, right? Apps fall over, come up. Scalability. How about just an ecosystem? Some path to support when something changes with my Oracle driver. Thanks, team at Oracle. When something changes with that Oracle driver, that I get a new library that I can easily adapt and I can easily incorporate. Like, what are those things? What does it look like in your head when you go to production? What are the things that, man, if I'm going to do this with just Java, what are the things that I've got to do?
Think about
when you make that list, it's going to look a lot like Spring.
Yeah, I feel so confident, and I didn't feel this way 20 years ago, but using Spring, if I walked into your organization today and you said, this is the type of application we're trying to build, is Spring a good fit for us? Yeah, of course it is. No matter what you're trying to build, as far as an enterprise goes, like I feel confident that given the ecosystem, we have all of the tools available to build whatever you're trying to build.
This is a question. Hey, sorry for another question. To run production-like application for testing, what's your view on the Spring Boot Maven plugin start goal to start the standalone? That test main, I think it's just Spring Boot test run versus the Docker Compose up. start your Docker Compose or having the Docker Compose file started automatically? Like, what's your view? I like both. I was trying to go all in, and I didn't want to have a Docker Compose in my application, but here's where I'm at now. The Docker Compose, whether I'm using it or not, I can still use the test main application. The Docker Compose, it becomes part of my documentation. It describes the system that I'm connecting to. It describes those external dependencies really well without having to go in and look in my test container test application. So I like both for lots of reasons. Yeah, so I'll say that. Dan, do you have any opinions on either the test main or the Docker Compose approach?
No, I think that was a good answer. And I think that was a good one to end on, because we
just crazy. How could
went
that
from
be an
0
hour?
to 100 real quick.
How can that be an hour already? I don't understand what happens. We're in like some time warp. We have all of you. Thank you for coming and joining in. And it's the great questions. It's the great questions and comments and everybody that's joined. Thank you so much for joining. But we literally go into a time warp. We're here to help. Thank you for being here.
And I thought this was a lot of fun today. Fun topic to go through. But hey, if you have suggestions on a topic that you would like to see us cover, please head over to springofficehours.io. This is where you can catch all the archives of the podcast, of the live stream, find out more about us. But more importantly, you can suggest a topic there. So if you want to see us cover something a little bit more in depth, go ahead and fill out that form. We get that, and we'll take a look at that.
There's one more thing that I feel like we should have said. Like, today is the 27th. The Java Champions Conference is happening right now.
Yes.
Like, there's a ton of good content. Isn't this a free conference?
It is. It started Thursday, and it's going through tomorrow. And if you missed some of the talks that were on Thursday and Friday, you can catch them on YouTube. But yes, go to the Java Champions Conference website. You can see the schedule for today and tomorrow.
Java Champions is a great organization, great group of people. I actually know somebody that is a Java champion.
Ooh, I do too.
So yeah, make sure, check it out. It's a solid conference. And then there's another kind of big Java conference coming up here in just like a handful of weeks. But I'm thinking specifically about Java 1 returning.
Oh yeah, Java 1's coming up.
So this, hey, we talked about Java, and let's bring it back a little bit. All right, Spring is great, but there's a lot more to the Java ecosystem than just Spring.
For sure.
What we talk about here. So I think this is a good.
I will be at Java 1 speaking, so I'm excited about that.
I'm excited for you. It's going to be a good
there are actually a bunch of really great conferences coming out. I just want to mention a few. Confu is coming up in February in Montreal, Java 1 in March, and DevNexus. Man, I look forward to DevNexus. I couldn't go there last year, and I was so excited to be there this year.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be at DevNexus, we are going. There's going to be a booth there, the Spring booth. There's going to be Spring AI demos, Spring App Advisor demos, all the demos. We're going to have so much fun showing those off. So make sure you stop by the booth and say hi.
What about a Spring AI demo with Spring App Advisor?
Whoa, those do work. Oh, there you go.
Oh boy. It's good times. I'm sorry that we ran out of time. Thank you for all the good questions. But you can also reach out. We have springofficehours.io. Go let us know what you're thinking about, what you'd like to hear more about. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. We will get one scheduled for next week, and we will see you in the next episode. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.